and gentle to our volunteers, please, as well as our staff. There are 2 emergency exits, one on this side and one on that side. There's a bathroom on this level and 2 below. This is our 60th anniversary year, as I'm sure you are all aware. We've had many events and festivities here, and to tell you more about our fundraising efforts, I'd like to call on Kit Dickey.
Yay. So many of you have seen me here many times before, because many of you come to as many talks as I come to. I committed to January, so in February I will be only here sporadically. But why am I here? I am here to encourage you most, what language am I talking in? Most forcefully to encourage you to donate to the 60th anniversary fundraiser. We've been here 60 years, and we hope to be here for another 60 years. And that really is dependent on maintaining an account that is a general fund account that we use for all of our assorted needs. Our goal is to raise $60,000. You notice 60, 60, 60. $60,000 by the end of the snowbird season, because we're basically snowbirds at this point, and which is the end of March. And the goal is, as I say, to build up that account. For me personally, the reason why I am allowing myself to be totally humiliated by doing this, because this is not my gig, and having my picture everywhere, which is not my gig, and they told me it would only be up there for 2 weeks. That was the beginning of December. This has become more than 2 months. And it is really not my jam at all. But the reason I am willing to do this is because I would not be able to come to Oaxaca on an annual basis if I didn't have OLL as my landing pad. I get here, I have instant community, I have support for not only what's going on and all the gossip, all the chisme, but also if you have any kind of need, there's somebody here who has had that need before and can tell you exactly where to go and how to get it accomplished, and even go with you frequently, go with you and make sure that even though I speak very bad Spanglish, people have gone with me to help me at the pharmacy, that kind of stuff. So having that instant community is what allows me to be here and allows a lot of us to be here. And therefore, we are somewhat obliged to give back. I won't go into politics at all, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Kit. I'm sure most of you are already members of the library, but if you're not yet a member, please do consider joining. There are both seasonal memberships and year-round memberships, and the price is very nominal, and it gives you access to all the library has to offer, including taking books out, going on our trips, hikes, tours, whatever, and this, of course, these terrace talks. So at this point, I would like to introduce our speaker. Chuck Collins is an American author and a senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C., where he directs a program on inequality and the common good. He's also co-founder of Wealth for the Common Good and an expert on inequality in the United States. He's pioneered efforts to bring together investors and business leaders to speak out publicly against corporate practices and economic policies that increase economic equality. Chuck lives in the quaint state of Vermont, and he lives on a farm, and he has animals and maple trees. So with that, let's welcome our speaker for today, Chuck Collins.
Helen. Thank you for coming out, and thanks to Helen and thanks for 60 years of the Oaxaca Lending Library. And I lived here 20 years ago. Actually, I was here in the 2005, 2006, the sort of Apo uprising year, with my 10-year-old daughter. And she was going to elementary school. She's the person who actually mastered Spanish in our family. And but my wife Mary and I have come back several times, 6 times or so. We still work, but we come in January and get to work from here part of the time, and it's just great to be here. And as you said, this is a really important landing pad as an organization and a place to find information. And the events just keep getting better and better and deeper and richer. So I hope you'll support the library and keep it going. And thanks to Doug for being our tech guy, making all this possible, including recording this so people who couldn't come today can watch it. This is actually the 3rd time I've done a talk here at the Oaxaca Lending Library. And a couple years ago, actually, I did one on a book called The Wealth Hoarders, How Billionaires Pay Millions to Hide Trillions, sort of about the whole industry of tax attorneys and accountants and wealth managers who help the ultra-wealthy move their money to the shadows and avoid tax. And I don't know, is there a way to turn that? Well, I guess we won't turn it off. Anyway, I think I would have done better if I had titled it "How to Hide $1 Billion." But anyway, but.
So, I'm sorry, I didn't train you before.
Okay.
Handheld and the clicker that will advance your slides.
Okay, I've already learned how to do it though. Yeah, mastered it. So. So yeah, as Helen said, we live in rural Vermont. We're getting lots of nice reports from it's 10 below this morning at our town. And thanks to Nest, our little app that we can use, thanks to Larry Goosen and people who created it, we now know that it's 67 degrees in our house, though. So I want to start by I'm going to talk a little bit about a book that I wrote that came out in October. Actually, I donated a copy to the library, and I have one more copy I'm going to give, so you can check it out and read it here. But I had a very short-lived career as a congressional intern to Congressman Barney Frank. Any of you ever have dealings with Barney Frank, right? So he was kind of a hard guy to work for. And pretty much, I would get a research assignment, research this housing legislation, and then it would be my big moment to brief the congressman, and I'd have my talking points and chart and everything, and he was always in a hurry, and he'd come rushing in, and he'd say, okay, tell me something I don't know. And I was stumped. And I never had anything he didn't know, because he was like the smartest guy in the room. Anyway, so here I am talking to you about how billionaires are disrupting our democracy and society. And I suspect you're probably thinking, tell me something I don't know. Tell me how to fix it. And so let me state, but I do want to offer a sort of little bit of an analytical framework to understand the problem, but then definitely talk about what is it we can do together. What's the kind of work that's actually happening out there? And my humble hope is that you'll kind of leave with a new set of glasses or lenses to sort of understand what's going on. Because my argument is these extreme concentrations of wealth and power are pretty much undermining everything we care about. And I'm not going to start off, I'm not really going to initially talk about the immigration and ICE issue, which obviously is very much in our hearts and minds, but except to say that for 30 years, immigration and scapegoating immigrants has been a staple of the U.S. right wing. It has been the way in which attention has been deflected and distracted away from what I want to talk about, which is this growing power grab and this destructive concentration of wealth and power. And it is an intentional playbook to particularly shift people's attention away from the ways your pockets are being picked by the billionaire class. So I'm happy to talk more about sort of the interaction of immigration policy, but my hope is that you will come away thinking, oh, there's ways in which my life, and I'm talking in a U.S. context, and I apologize for that. That's pretty much what I know. I know a bit about Mexico, but I know more than anybody else here probably. But, how is my life being disrupted personally by these growing concentrations of wealth and power? And then what can we do about it? So the first thing, though, before I kind of get into the 10 ways you're being burned by billionaires, I want to just define a few things. One is, who is wealthy? Or what do I mean when I'm talking about the wealthy? Am I really just talking about U.S. billionaires, 915 billionaires? Or am I talking about the 1%? Some of you remember the Occupy movement, 99 to 1. Or is it the top, is it just millionaires? And what I try to do in this book and what I try to do in my work is to show that at a certain point, wealth translates into significant power. And then that's when we should sort of sit up and wave a flag. So, and I kind of draw that line around the top 1/10 of 1%, the top 1/1000th of households, people with in the 40 to 50 million dollar level. If you have 40, 50 million dollars, you are comfortable, you have multiple homes, you may be flying private, your children are kind of launched, and you are probably living in a bubble if you choose to. And but when you cross up of that $50 million mark, you're no longer just buying another boat or another house. You're beginning to buy senators and news outlets and use your power and leverage to shape the environment and the rules that govern our society. And so I would say from that top 1/10 of 1% up to the billionaire class is where we should focus our attention in terms of fixing these grotesque distortions that I'm going to talk about. And that's the level when it becomes not just power, but power over the rest of everyone else, over the rest of our society. Another context point is, you may hear phrases like, let's abolish billionaires, or let's work for a world without billionaires. And I don't, there's a little bit of whiff of exterminism there that I don't like, and we're getting a very important course in how important language is right now, and so I think it's important to say, yes, there are billionaires who are individually have terrible behavior, are driving certain harms. But we're really talking about a system of laws and policies that funnels wealth to the top. And so our focus, I think, is on how do we change a system that's rigged to funnel wealth to the top, and not to get so overly focused on the behavior of individual billionaires. I think what we want is fewer billionaires and more thousandaires. In a society where there's 70% of the population lives very close to the brink, has very little, we would be better off with fewer billionaires and more thousandaires. And at this point, I have a very nifty explanation. Many of you sometimes think, a million, a billion. Now we have Elon Musk. He's almost going to be a trillionaire. What is a billion? So here's one nifty little thing, which is, if you were counting, let's just start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If we counted to a million seconds, it would take us about 12 days. If we counted 1 billion seconds, it would take us about 31 years. If you were counting 1 trillion seconds, it would be 32,688 years. So that's a lot, right? Okay, so the other kind of thing I think it's important to address, because there's a powerful narrative that justifies extreme inequality, right? Somebody is a billionaire, and you will talk to some of your friends, and they'll say, well, yeah, but didn't they create something useful? Didn't they, make a useful product? Isn't Amazon a useful thing? Don't they deserve to have all that wealth? And I want to just demystify a little bit of, or explain something, and this is one of the few, I don't have a lot of slides, but I have a couple that I'll share. And I kind of have come up with, obviously with help from others, a sort of paradigm. How is wealth created? And there's sort of 4 phases. The first phase, wealth accumulation. So that's often from an entrepreneurial activity, starting a business, starting an enterprise, building a better mousetrap. Larry co-founds Nest, and Taba invents some cool recipe for some lacto thing that, and people love it, and they want to buy it, and they spend money, and we are enriched by this entrepreneurial activity, and these people should be rewarded for what they're doing. They are starting businesses, and I'm not anti-business. I think it's very, very hard to be an entrepreneur, and but then at a certain point, the accumulation of wealth becomes so great that you're able to actually do two things. One, invest in defending your wealth from competition. So let's say, Alex creates a great mousetrap. And she's sold so many mousetraps, she's got $50 million now, and she starts to say, Helen is thinking about creating a mousetrap. She's my competitor. How can I make it a little harder to, maybe I'll buy her out early, or I'll do something to defend my business. I'm starting to use my wealth to defend my business. The other thing I'll do is do what I wrote this other book about, which is I'm going to go out and hire all these people to hide my money so I don't have to pay tax. So the wealth holders begin to invest a lot in defending their wealth from competition, from taxation, and essentially corrupt. And then they move to the phase of political capture, using their wealth to influence the political system, rewrite the rules, ban other types of mousetraps, get government subsidies for my mousetrap business but not Helen's, and using the political system and clout to capture our democratic institutions and often block changes. And the fourth phase is the one that I think I want you to understand the most, which is when you reach a certain level of wealth, you have so much wealth that you're looking at ways to expand it by investing in things that extract more wealth from the real economy. And at a certain point, this is not about creating jobs. In fact, it's often about destroying jobs and getting more wealth. And I'm going to talk more about that because this is one of the ways in which extreme inequalities of power and wealth touch our lives, touch healthcare, touch how our animals are cared for, touch the housing market. And I'll give those examples. But so I find it useful because people like to dwell on the first phase, the entrepreneurial phase, and celebrate that, which we should. But it's these later stages when the power starts to concentrate and corrupt the economic system that is where, where capitalism goes off the rails. So a couple of examples of, actually I have one more thing I'll say. So in the same vein, am I anti-capitalist? Am I an advocate of socialist? I come from Vermont, so I have a senior state senator I like to mimic a little bit. He says, under the socialist presidency of Dwight Eisenhower, the richest 1% paid 92% on their incomes. And we invested that wealth into investing in public infrastructure that lifted up working people, affordable housing, infrastructure. You get the idea. So, Bernie Sanders, right. So, yeah. Yeah, he heard me on the radio doing that, and I got in trouble. But anyway, so, under the socialist presidency of Dwight Eisenhower, the tax rates. So, of course, Dwight Eisenhower would be a socialist today. I mean, we're all domestic terrorists today, so things are moving around. My point is that there's a lot of flavors of capitalism. I grew up working at, Baskin Robbins 31 flavors. There's 31 flavors of capitalism. The United States we have to be living through this hyper-extractive, extremely predatory form of capitalism, but there's, the Nordic model and Canada and Europe and even Mexico, different types of organizations, some with very strong social safety nets, some with much more progressive tax systems. So, I think part of our political impasse is we don't know how to celebrate the good aspects of private enterprise and private markets and talk about the harmful aspects and make a distinction. And it comes into this kind of cartoonish, like, well, are you anti-capitalist? Are you pro-socialist? Now, actually, I'm very happy my friend Nancy Romer's here, because I want to shout out and invite you to join me on Monday night for her talk about the incoming mayor of New York City and what he's doing there. So Nancy, there's Nancy in the room. Nancy Romer's doing a talk this very space Monday night. Don't miss it. So, and we'll have a debate. Nancy and I can have a debate about democratic socialism versus democratic capital or whatever. But one just thing that we're living through, and the other just takeaway point that I would like you to have is, the last 5 years, these inequalities have, it's like somebody poured an accelerant on them, right? So one stat, and I don't have a lot of slides and data points, I do in the book, but here's one just from this month. We do an annual look at how much wealth the billionaire class has seen their assets increase. There are 15 billionaires in the United States, all worth over 100 million. That 100 billion, thank you, 100 billion. So they're centibillionaires. Remember how many seconds 1 billion is? Now, it's like the centuries of seconds to be a centibillionaire. Their wealth in 1 year, from the end of 2024 to 2025, New Year's Day, increased 30%, from 2.4 trillion to 3.1 trillion. So just one segment. That's partly this AI phenomena, that's partly, but it's not even within the billionaire class, there's sort of a runaway, extreme concentration of wealth. And the mechanism of that is something I describe, and Peter Turchin describes, as the wealth pump. Wages are stagnant. Wages have been flat almost for 5 decades. Almost all the productivity gains of the last several decades have gone to owners of wealth and to the very top. The Rand Corporation did a study estimating that if workers since 1975 had been paid, the bottom 90% of workers had been paid reflecting the actual productivity gains that they made, contributed to. The bottom 90% would have $79 trillion more in wealth that has actually gone to that top 10% and mostly the top 1%. So think of what our society, what U.S. society would look like if workers over the last 50 years had actually shared in the productivity gains that they'd made, as opposed to funnel them to the top. All right, enough on that. Let me talk about how you're being burned by the billionaires. The most obvious one is obviously your voice and your vote are being robbed. The political capture of our democracy, the crowding out of the voice of voters with the influence of big money. Think about who gets to stand for election. Certainly at the federal level, it helps if you have a billionaire backer. There's room to move at state and local level. There are some really good exceptions and examples where your vote does matter. But more and more your vote is actually irrelevant, and actually these great political scientists have studied the influence of money in politics, and the quote I like is, non-wealthy voters have only a minuscule, non-zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. In other words, what you think and vote does not really matter that much. And again, there's important exceptions to that, but and where big money really comes into play is blocking things that are enormously popular. Public opinion is we should have universal health care, and we should have a public option for health care alongside maybe a private system. The public opinion would say multimillionaires and billionaires should pay their fair share of taxes, and we should enforce. We should have a modern child care system. We should invest in the climate transition and infrastructure that reduces emissions. These are wildly popular ideas, and they are not happening because our political system is captured. And it is helpful and hopeful to remember that in 2021, Congress came within 2 votes of passing legislation called Build Back Better, coming out of the pandemic, coming out of the awareness of inequality, coming out of the pandemic. People were like, we need to make investments in the healthcare system, lifting people out of poverty. We got a taste of that during the pandemic, what it meant to lift and limit, reduce child poverty. And we came within 2 votes in the U.S. Senate. Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, they bought them off. They got them to block a $4 trillion investment over 10 years, paid for entirely by taxes on multimillionaires and billionaires. It came within that close. So some days when you think, well, never ever, it's never possible, this is completely hopeless. Remember, only 4 years ago, in our muscle memory, is legislation that almost happened and could, with another pendulum swing politically, come to happen. The billionaires are driving up the cost of housing for everyone, not just people who are unsheltered, but people who are stuck in rental housing, unable to own a home, or even people who are in the rental market are finding more and more of the housing is owned by billionaire-backed investor funds. Now, some of you have been to the coastal cities, and you see this huge investment in luxury housing. These towers, many of which are unoccupied. They're like safe deposit boxes in the sky. They're just wealth holding units for the global wealthy. And so think of the amount of land and resources and labor power and energy that go into build these huge towers that no one is actually living in a lot of jurisdictions, or living in very rarely. And this is where I want you to understand a really important point. And my wife Mary, who's heard me blathering about this for 30 years, actually says, well, this is actually the one thing, that useful thing that you said that I remember now. It's a little bit of a Zen moment. You have to get into your inner billionaire. You have $1 billion. Where are you going to invest it? Where do you put it? You don't put it all in the stock market. You don't, even if you have $10,000, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. So you're looking to spread your investments over multiple asset classes, in investor lingo. So you're going to put some money in the stock market, but you're going to put some in the bond market, and you're going to put some in real estate, and you're going to put some in crypto and art and jewelry. I mean, again, you're a billionaire, right? You got $1 billion. You got to figure out where it's going to go so you can hold that value and grow it. And so real estate is a huge part of how you diversify your holdings, because you can buy a luxury condo in Toronto, and one in Vancouver, and one in San Francisco, and one in New York, and you've hedged your risks and you've spread your assets around just within that real estate asset class. And the other part of the story, which is but you have all these investment advisors. You're a billionaire. You have a whole enabler group around you helping you to move your money. And so even if you're not aggressively trying to grow your billion, you still have people saying, look, let's take 1/3 of your wealth and put it into investments that will get a higher return. Well, where are you going to do that? Now, most of you, if you have your money in a savings account, how much are you earning on your savings account? Nothing, 0. Nothing, yes. So, okay, so maybe you got a money market fund. Okay, how much are you earning on that? 3%, 5%? When you are a billionaire, your cadre of investment advisors are saying, look, we're going to move money into these other funds, and you're going to get what kind of returns? Anybody have a guess? 12? 19? I want 25, thank you very much. And that's what my advisors are going to get from me. Now, where do you get a 25% return on your investment? You move it into the speculative edge of the market. And that's a huge part of that is in housing and real estate. So there are investor funds where you can just buy up short-term rentals. probably in Oaxaca and everywhere else. Short-term rentals is a huge market and a place where you can get huge returns. Jeff Bezos has invested in a fund that buys single-family houses around the country. Now, why would you do that? Well, because there's all these people like our kids who maybe at some point in their life, in a past generation, might have owned their own home, but are never going to be able to buy their own home. They're going to be stuck in rental housing. But they got kids and they want a yard and maybe a single-family house. So they rent a single-family house from the private equity fund that Jeff Bezos has invested in. So all over this country now, in Minneapolis, there's neighborhoods I could show you. You go around, half the houses on the block, single-family houses, are owned by billionaire-backed private equity funds. Mobile home parks. Arnie and Judith and I work in New Hampshire on resident-owned mobile home parks, trying to help tenants to organize to buy their mobile home parks. But it's a great investment. As one of the billionaire investors said to me, I love buying mobile home parks because the residents don't really have anywhere to go. I'm just buying the land and I can raise that fee. He says, it's great. It's like owning a Waffle House where your customers are chained to the booths and nowhere to go. That is in housing where the big money is going in. It's going into where there's a shortage of housing and where you can squeeze more out of people. That's why people are paying 30, 40, 50% of their income to live in rental housing. So that touches all of us, and it touches all of our communities, and if it doesn't touch us individually, it touches our children and grandchildren. The housing market is being disrupted by the billionaires. Okay, your health. Your health is actually worsened because of these great concentrations and inequalities of wealth. This is my friend Stephen Bezruka wrote a book about this, but there's a lot of research that shows the more unequal societies are, the worse the health outcomes are for everyone, including the wealthy and affluent. Because what happens when a society gets too unequal is there's a breakdown in solidarity. There's a breakdown in that sense like we're all in this together. And we got to see that during the COVID-19 pandemic, where some people made huge sacrifices, took risks, died, went to work. Other people were able to live in a protected space and bubble. And some people, the billionaire class, actually made huge amounts of money during the pandemic. The cloud-based technologies, the, DoorDash. There were like 5 guys who became billionaires because of DoorDash. What does DoorDash do? It's an app. It just extracts rent from other people's work. They're not growing the food. They're not cooking the food. They're not delivering the food. They just own an app. That's an economy that's broken down. Solidarity is broken down. But the other thing is, again, remember those billionaire investors and trying to get a little bit more money out of the economy? Those billionaire-backed private equity funds are identified the healthcare economy, which is a sixth of our economy, as ripe for plunder. A third of hospital emergency rooms now are owned by billionaire-backed private equity funds. More and more hospitals are being bought by private equity funds. Living in Boston, I watched a private equity fund buy Carney Hospital, owned by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Boston, where they then bundled it together with 9 other hospitals and created Steward Healthcare, owned by Cerberus Capital. And they sliced off the real estate and made all those hospitals pay rent to their subsidiary. And they took out huge fees, and they squeezed every corner of that enterprise. The workers, the doctors, the customers, the patients, and to bringing those hospitals to the brink of bankruptcy. And that is the model right now. And so if you're fortunate to have a nonprofit hospital in your community, it's hard enough to make that work. But now the billionaires are coming for the healthcare system. And so the first investment that they make is in billing. Now, if you've had the unfortunate experience of having a medical incident where you're in the U.S. And you come home and hopefully you're feeling better, you get like 7 different bills. One from these different medical specialty groups, the ambulance, of course, and There's like, and you're going to get one every month until you pay that. They invest first in billing, right? So this is just a tip of the iceberg of how the billionaires are making us sicker, making us trade off between health expense and other expenses, squeezing more out of an already squeezed healthcare system. The environment. The billionaires are trashing the environment and affecting our ability to make the transition to a livable future. And let me be clear. So, first of all, the billionaire class are the super emitters. They're the biggest emitters of carbon and methane. Why? Because they're flying private jets, they're in yachts, they have multiple homes, they're jetting around. Their lifestyle and consumption is multiple times greater than the rest of us. Average American emits 14 tons of carbon emissions a year. And that number, actually, according to Larry, is coming down, thanks to all kinds of transformations. The average 1/10 of 1%, the richest 1/10 of 1% globally, consumes 2.2 tons a day. Okay, so who's going to need to change their behavior the most and the fastest? The billionaire class. And this, thanks to Oxfam, has tracked this marvelously. But I work on a project that just looks at private jets and the expansion of private jets, because the more billionaires and the more centimillionaires, the more people want to have their own jet. And outside Boston, there's a little former Air Force Base private jet field called Hanscom Field, and there's a proposal to triple the private jet hangar space at Hanscom Field. Everybody else in the state is figuring out how to reduce their emissions, and then you look over here, and these folks are about to blow off a carbon bomb of emissions. And I know this is going to break your heart. There are a lot of unsheltered private jets out there that need hangars because the demand is so great. Anyway, so the billionaires are the super emitters. They are the ones that need to, and yet they're the ones who are not only not changing their behavior, they're telling the rest of us, yeah, you need to change your behavior. Hey, you lazy bum, you could have walked to the store or bike there. How come you're, what's your carbon footprint? BP creates this thing called the carbon footprint, so each of you can know, oh, shame on you for flying to Oaxaca, burning up air, carbon in the air. You need to change your behavior. Well, guess what? If the billionaires don't change their behavior first and fastest, we're being played as chumps. And in order to actually address the climate crisis, which we all need to play a role in, we need to have a sense of shared sacrifice and solidarity. And if I'm like trying to make some decision about to forego some consumption so I can invest in retrofitting my house and insulating it, and Kylie Jenner is flying across town in their private jet for lunch, I don't feel like a lot of solidarity there. I don't feel like, why am I having to make a sacrifice and they're not? So the environmental crisis, we need to focus on the drivers of it. And there's a third problem here, which is there's a segment of the billionaire class, I call them the fossil fuel oilgarchs, the oil, gas, and coal billionaires, their wealth has come from that, who are investing in blocking the transition to a healthy climate transition. And of course, they've captured the US White House, they've captured energy policy, we're keeping coal plants open that should have been shut down. I could go on, but you get the picture, right? So actually, I was so mad about this, I created a website called climatecriminals.org, and we actually look at who are the individuals who are using their wealth and power and position to block the orderly transition to climate reduction. And, we're lobbying to tax private jet fuel and invest in climate transition as an example of the kind of things we can do together. Your taxes. The nutshell is the ultra-wealthy have pretty much opted out of the tax system. Now, the working wealthy, people who have high incomes, actually are the people who pay the highest taxes in our federal income tax system. We have still have, it's not the socialist regime of Dwight Eisenhower anymore, but the top tax rate is still 37%. It's not 92%, but it's 37%, which is higher than, lower income folks are paying, 15% or whatever. But what's happened over a short time is taxes have shifted off the wealthy onto wage earners, off of capital, income from capital gains and wealth, onto wages, off of states, off the federal government onto states and localities, off of corporations and onto individuals. You do that for 50 years, you're going to wake up and find a whopper property tax bill and a whopper sales tax, which are the most regressive taxes. And so, I find, being a Vermonter, we complain about our property taxes. It's part of our state religion. But we're right. Our property taxes have gone up because we used to tax the rich at the federal level and send aid to the states to pay certain bills, health care, mental health, infrastructure services. Now, we as Vermonters are having to foot the bill for those things, and we're raising that money through a more regressive tax system. So we have been shifting off of the wealthy. And the wealthy, again, higher, I could go on about this, but there's all these ways in which the ultra-wealthy are pretty much not paying taxes. They might pay a little bit of income tax, but most of their income is from capital, so they're paying a lower rate. Most of the wealth, the giant billions that we're talking about, are untaxed. So, the food system. I recommend this great book, What's on Your Dinner Plate. The billionaires are basically dictating what's on your dinner plate and how much it costs because it's so concentrated. The food sector has become so concentrated. There's one example, Cargill Macmillan. One family controls 25% of all grain in the global market. There are 100 members of the Cargill Macmillan family worth $60 billion. 21 of them are billionaires. They dictate the price and drive food policy. And I could go on there. The billionaires are coming for your pets. They know we love our animals, and we're willing to pay money for their care and good lives. And this is across generations. There's a whole generation of young people. They're not having children, but if their cat needs an operation, they will put the credit card down and go deep into debt to care for the animals they love. Guess what? The billionaire private equity guys have figured that out. They figured out this is another place where people aren't going to be able to control their spending, so they're buying up veterinary clinics, food processors. Who's the biggest food producer for pet food? The Mars family. The dynastically wealthy Mars family that own Mars Candy also are the largest owners of pet and veterinary care services. And now there are these dog walker apps. Anybody ever use Wags or Rover.com? You match somebody who wants to walk your dog and you need your dog walked, and they take a cut. Well, guess who bought that? Blackstone, $1 trillion private equity fund. They understand there's money to be made because people are making decisions with their hearts, not their wallets, when it comes to their pets. And there's an opportunity to squeeze more. Billionaires are disrupting philanthropy. Philanthropy, the charity system, foundations, and donor advised funds are more and more becoming an extension of private power and wealth. And I could go on. Actually, I liked Billie Eilish, the young singer. She had a great audience. She had a bunch of billionaires in the room, and she just had given away, tens of thousands of dollars to shelters and soup kitchens. And she said, and Zuckerberg was in the room, she says, listen, if you're a billionaire, why are you a billionaire? No hating, but give your money away, shorty. All right. Okay. So what do we do together? We have this captured political system where our voices are, diminished. What can we do? The good news I see is there is an awakening about these problems. In the last 2 years, really, I think coming out of the pandemic, the obscenity of so much wealth being extracted during the pandemic by the billionaire class crossed a line. We Americans have a very high tolerance for inequality if we feel like the rules are fair and anybody can have a shot. But it became clear like these folks were using their power to rig the rules to take more than they deserved. So there is an awakening. And more we're going to see people running for office with a very simple campaign slogan. I'm going to work to build an economy that lifts up everybody, not just the billionaire class. I'm no longer going to be the subservient member of the Senate for the billionaire class. And those people are going to start to campaign and win election. That will start to pivot the politics. So Nancy talking about the new mayor of New York, who basically ran on a program of, I'm going to address the affordability crisis, which is the fact that people can't afford the basics of life, housing, health care, transportation, food, and we're going to together build an economy that is more affordable, and we're going to and require the billionaires to pay, the ultra-wealthy to pay their fair share. And that is a winning program. Even in an oligarchy dominated by money, that will start to crack. There's room to move at the state and local level. So we're seeing all these ballot initiatives coming online this year, millionaire income taxes, billionaire wealth taxes. And those, I think, will do quite well. In Massachusetts, we had an income tax ballot initiative to add a 4% income tax on incomes over $1 million. One, overwhelmingly, the money goes to transportation and infrastructure and education. And there's $2 billion, which in a state budget is a lot of money, that's coming from those most able to pay. We're up against this narrative I mentioned at the beginning, which is, well, you know, when you mention taxing the wealthy, some people will say very quickly, well, you know, you're going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. You're going to destroy jobs. These people are deserving what they did. You know, kind of reminds me of the J. Paul Getty was once asked, how do you become wealthy in America? And he said, it's really simple. There's 3 things you have to do. In fact, we can do a poll here. 1, get up early in the morning. How many of you got up early this morning? Okay, some of you are retired. That's all right. 2, work hard all day, including going to a boring lecture in the late afternoon. All right, yeah. 3, find oil. It's really simple. But that narrative that people are wealthy because they got up early in the morning, they worked hard, they worked harder than you, they worked smarter than you, and they created something useful, that is the dominant narrative that justifies great wealth, of which there is a kernel of truth, right? I'm not begrudging the people who get up early, but there are a lot of people who work hard. There's a lot of teachers that get up early, work hard all day, and don't find oil or even get rich, and other occupations. And I think that narrative of we deserve all the wealth I have, I deserve all the wealth I have, that sentence always starts with the word I, and leaves out the matrix, the web of all the things that make individual wealth creation possible in the society, public investments, education, support, other workers, that sort of fertile ground that we together create that makes individual wealth possible. So yes, what individuals do matters, but what we as a society do does matter. So I think telling true stories about luck, opportunity, the help that people get is part of how we shift that narrative. It doesn't take away anything from people's genius and talent and effort. It's just understanding the complexity. So let me mention a few other things that I find inspiring and then open up and hear any comments, questions you have. There are what I call game-changing campaigns that are being incubated around the country. In Michigan, the voters in Michigan this year will vote on an initiative, an income tax increase on millionaire incomes that will fund education in the state of Michigan. And that's being replicated in about 10 states. Californians have a ballot question, a one-time California wealth tax, a 5% one-time tax on wealth over $1 billion. It will go toward funding health care for people who've been left out of the healthcare system. I think, there's now you hear the 210 billionaires in California. Some of them are saying, we're going to leave. Some of them are like, no big deal. It's interesting to listen to the ones who say no big deal because they say things like, if you were going to, in the market, some days I lose 5% of my wealth. Does that mean that I'm going to move to Mississippi or Texas? I mean, I might move to Texas, but, I love California. I'm here because I love California, and I want to invest in California, and I want California to be a state where everybody thrives. They have a narrative of, I'm in it, we're all in it together, as opposed to I'm the great man, and don't punish me, and I'm going to leave, So these conflicting narratives. But this California initiative, it may or may not go forward, but it's a real messaging bill. People are talking about the harms caused by billionaire disruption and where to fix it. I mentioned we're doing a whole campaign. Tax private jet fuel, fund green energy and green transit. Tax luxury housing. This is happening in all kinds of cities. Housing over 5 million transfers. You have a luxury transfer tax. Put it into a fund for permanently affordable housing. State and localities are experimenting with that. The key here is what I call kind of a game-changing campaign. Find something that rallies people together, that they know will make a difference in their lives. Work for that. Pay for it by a tax that reduces the concentration of wealth and power. 40 million people have student debt in this society, in our country, in the U.S. I say in the U.S. Tax inherited wealth above 40 million. Put it into a fund for debt-free higher education. Oh, maybe connect it to national service. You do 2 years national service, community service, military service, and you get free college education. Who's not going to stand and salute that? Oh, and by the way, we're going to pay for it by billionaires who have so much money, it ain't going to make a huge difference to them. So those are the kind of campaigns that are being incubated and putting forward. Some of them are international. There's a global wealth tax movement led by European countries to tax wealth and fund the climate transition, fund infrastructure and climate transition. So 5 little things that I would invite you to think about. And one is just talk to your neighbors. When people are talking about, grumbling about their local property tax, grumbling about the cost of food, grumbling about housing, say, let me tell you how this problem is being supercharged by these concentrations of wealth and power. Map your own life and your own budget and see how much of your own budget now is going to the billionaire wealth extractors, and find if you can find a way around that, or at least understand your health care dollar. Fight to make sure your hospital doesn't get sold to a private equity fund. Defend, if you have a choice between a veterinary clinic that's owned by a global private equity fund and a local mom and pop veterinary clinic, choose the one that's locally owned. Support local ownership and enterprises in your communities. Work on campaigns at all levels to tax wealth and diminish concentrated wealth and power. Engage in one of these game-changing campaigns. Oh, and one final thing is join the satirical resistance. We've got to maintain our sense of humor in this moment. So some of you may remember there was a group called Billionaires for Bush that was sort of a humorous. Now there's Trillionaires for Trump. Check out the website. Adopt your billionaire name. And get out there, is it March 23rd is the next big No King's Day march in the United States? 28th of March, there's going to be, another 10 million, hopefully plus people out in the streets. And, but form a Trillionaires for Trump theater little group to entertain everybody and amuse them. They've launched their healthcare campaign. It's called Go Fund Yourself. So, anyway. And look, I'm on time. That's when I wanted to end. All right. So, we have a roaming mic, right? Thanks to Helen. So yeah, questions or comments? I'm all for comments. I'm not one of those, it has to be a question.
This is being recorded, so we do want to use the mic for questions. I'm just going back here first.
Most of the things that you've suggested have been at the local and state level. Have you kind of given up on our congressmen and senators? Is there anything that can be done that you see to stop them from being bought?
Yeah, I mentioned that. I mentioned those local things just partly because I think in this very moment, it's sort of hard to imagine anything happening. But state and local is where we always incubate ideas. It's kind of where we kind of exercise our muscle and our arguments. And it's where national elected officials are held accountable. So, you know, in Michigan, do you support a tax on millionaires to, you know, U.S. Congressman so-and-so, U.S. Congress rep? Do you support this or not? Are you with the children of Michigan or are you with the billionaire class? And showing how our U.S. elected officials are captured and who they vote with. And then when the challengers, as I say, when people step forward to, you know, hey, run for office at any level, and run for office on a program. I like you're encouraging your friend here. Yeah, you could tell her to run, right? So yeah, what's your name? Audrey. Vote. She's got it. She's got the handshake. So, but people running for office on a program of an economy that works for everyone, not just the billionaires. And here are the cornerstones of what that program looks like. And they happen to be things that people really are harmed, you know, addressing the real harms. Not a phony populism, but a real, genuine acknowledgement of the underlying causes of people's pain and working on that. So I think, you know, and again, 4 years ago, Build Back Better, 2 votes short. So that, you know, and it's worth going back and looking what was in Build Back Better. A modern child care system. Huge investments in climate mitigation and transition, some of which were in the Inflation Reduction Act, which are being dismantled. But, you know, there's a program there. We kind of know what the program is. We know how to pay for it. The whole way that was going to $4 trillion plan was going to be paid for was various taxes that primarily hit incomes and wealth over $1 million, over $5 million, and millionaires. So, you know, it's on the shelf, and it just needs the political will and support. So while we have room to move at the state and local level, let's do what we can, and then who knows? The opening may be faster than we think. The way things are moving, if nobody addresses the underlying cause, we're just going to keep going like this politically until somebody says, let's make this economy work for everybody.
Yeah, I have a terrific talk. I'm glad I'm here. You mentioned in passing philanthropy, and you also mentioned in passing Billie Eilish. I have done a bit of work with Mackenzie Scott, who is a heroine of mine.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I don't understand, and Billie kind of said it in her comments, is the concept of shame. And I guess I'm really surprised and disappointed at how these folks are getting away with it, I guess. And I'm interested in what you think about that, because Mackenzie Scott, ex-wife of Jeff Bezos, is giving away apparently all of her money. And why isn't that happening elsewhere? And how can we encourage that?
Yeah. Well, I am also a big fan of Mackenzie Scott, and you know, in her, very quickly after she divorced and got her own pile of money, wealth, whatever it was, I think it started at $33 billion and quickly became about 60, and she kept giving away like $15 billion, and it would grow by $15 billion. It was an interesting problem to have, which is, she says, I'm going to empty the vault. So she empties a fourth of the vault, and then the vault is full again. So that's the weird moment of the market. But she's showing the boys how to do it. You know, she stepped up immediately to sign the Giving Pledge. Now there's this, you know, now the first thing I'll say is, charity is not a substitute for a functioning tax system, a fair and functioning tax system that's democratically governed, that makes decisions about where we as a society should go. But lots of really good work happens through the charity system. 1/10 of the economy is, you know, the nonprofit sector, and that's supported by the charity system. I try to limit my answer, but one thing to say is, at the project I work for, we have a project that entirely looks at charity and what's happened to charity as inequality has grown. And what's happened is the nonprofit sector is more and more dependent on a top-heavy charity system, meaning more and more charity dollars are coming from the most wealthy. You know, it used to be, if you were in the nonprofit sector, some of you may know this, you used to have the 80-20 rule. You're going to raise 80% of your money from 20% of your donors, which means you're still going to pay attention to that 80% of donors who give to the March of Dimes, who give $10 a year or whatever. But what happens when it becomes the 99-1, where 99% of your money is coming from 1% of the donors? Or you're a university president and you basically have 3 billionaires and you pretty much know what they have for lunch every day. Like, that changes the nonprofit sector. It contributes to mission drift. Wealthy philanthropists are interested in inequality now, but there's two solutions that they somehow never get around to funding: the right of workers to organize and taxing the rich. I mean, so I think, you know, we need to reform the charity system so that it's not an opt-out for the wealthy to avoid taxes. We need to cap the amount of that can be deducted at the very highest levels. I used to work with Bill Gates' dad. I was his speechwriter, and he and I wrote a book that's in the library here, called Wealth in Our Commonwealth: Why America Should Tax Accumulated Wealth. And so Bill Gates Sr., the father of the founder of Microsoft, was a total civic guy, you know, totally like a give back community, you know, the virtuous cycle, everything like that. And he used to say, don't you think there's something wrong that my son can give $100 billion of Microsoft wealth that will never be taxed, and to give it to his own foundation and then sit there and decide and play God with this huge amount of money? That was his quote. And I agree. You know, I think we need to change the charity system. We need to make sure that it's not a way for the rich to opt out. Under the current rules, our charity system is essentially a taxpayer-subsidized form of private power. And that's where it fits into this story. So, you know, I think Mackenzie Scott is, back to your kind of the core of your question, which is, we need good examples. There's a guy, Chuck Feeney, who owned the duty-free shops. He was an Irish guy, had $20 billion at one point. At the end of his life, he had like $5 million and lived in a condo in San Francisco. He figured out how to give it all away and get to zero in his lifetime. He didn't create a 5-generation private foundation as a monument to his ego. He said, I'm going to solve today's problems in 20 years. So we need more exemplars like that. We need the tax code to sort of incentivize that. And we need to bring a healthy dose of skepticism when there are these big pronouncements about charitable giving. But I think Mackenzie Scott is the real deal. She just gave $20 million to the Agroecology Fund, which funds some of these projects here in Oaxaca around indigenous land management and food. Stuff like that. So it's like, go girl, you know? So.
Hi. Wonderful talk. Great examples of how the system is rigged against working class people. Let's remember what the source of all the money of these charitable givings is, which is the exploitation of working class people, and a system that goes through these periods of pulling back what people have won, and then in the face of struggle by working class people and others, give back some reforms. But we're always on this treadmill.
Yeah.
Well, he said comments. I'm making a comment. And I would say, I will be brief. We live in a capitalist system, and I know you talked about your position on this earlier, but the capitalist system is a dictatorship. Not just now when Trump is in power. It's always a dictatorship. The wealth that's been accumulated by families that are wealthy is as a function of capitalism. It doesn't stop because a liberal guy is in power or a conservative guy is in power. The whole system is set up to enrich a small class of people. Your 50 million and more, and probably we can lower that a little bit. And taxing isn't, to me, doesn't seem to be the answer. Taking power, which you express in terms of electoral reform, well, I don't think we can win it.
Right.
I mean, the history has shown us, for example, in Allende, they had a socialist win the election. And the capitalists in Chile, with the help of American capitalists and imperialists, murdered, thousands of people in a soccer stadium. So I would suggest to everyone we consider an alternative, like fighting for socialism or communism.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay. Who has been waiting here to talk?
She's running for office now, so probably wants a contribution.
I just want to say thank God for people like you that have done the work. I really mean it. I really mean it. It's an enormous amount of research, and you've been able to convey it so well and so clearly. I really mean that. My question is, I'm a Canadian, and I wondered, in your research, did you find or did you look at examples? You talked about exemplars of good examples of other countries that are doing better with all of this. Did you find those?
Yeah, I mean, I think the United States, a good starting place is to look at the Nordic social democracies and just say, which have, by the way, higher rates of entrepreneurship than the United States. They're vibrant private markets, but they also have a social safety net, a floor of decency through which people don't fall. If you try to start a business and you go belly up, you don't have to live in your car. You go back, get 14 months of job training and benefits and get back out there so you can pay taxes. They're pro-tax, pro-work societies. They have good social benefits. Young people don't go into indentured servitude to go to college. The whole experience of physical stress on the body is very different in those societies. It's very stressful to live in a society where you're one divorce, one job loss, one illness away from destitution. And we think that's normal. But there are other countries where that, including Canada, I think is an increment better on those fronts. So defend what you have in Canada. Don't follow the American model. Don't listen to these bozos who are trying to send, be more like the United States. Defend the commons. Defend the concept of social wealth is very, very important. So yeah, we have so much to learn from other countries. We have stuff to learn from Mexico, I think, just the more I see under the current, so, yeah.
I'd like to say a couple of things. One is capitalism works because people want to buy things. And that's the only system that has worked so far. And it depends on people buying things. But secondly, Aristotle said that the division between haves and haves not is what destroys democracy. And I wonder if you had any lessons from the Greeks and the Romans about this.
Well, it's actually, I draw on the work of a guy named Peter Turchin, who studies what happens to republics when there's too great of imbalance of wealth and power. And it's really interesting. And basically, well, it's obvious what happens. There's a move toward authoritarianism. There's war. There's disruption of and social polarization and depression. Those are when you stretch the bonds of inequality too much, when you immiserate workers to the extent that they are becoming more and more in this country, and concentrate wealth and power, that's what happens. So, but we can go back to our own, the first Gilded Age, 110 years ago, and see that was the last time when there was such a grotesque imbalance of wealth and power. And Louis Brandeis said exactly what you said. You can have democracy or you can have concentrated wealth, but you can't have both. And that's the moment we're in. We are about to lose our self-governing republic. And Trumpism is a symptom of extreme, accelerated, hyper-extractive capitalism and it happens in other societies, and it doesn't have to happen. So, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk, and but especially thank you for your work over so many years. I've been following you for a while, and I'm a city guy. I want to hear you talk about racism in the mix and how that holds all this in place. We white people sometimes think that what we have to do about racism is to give money to causes, and I think what you're talking about is exactly what actually we need to understand is that it's in our self-interest to end racism and poverty.
Yeah, I think I have a chapter that just looks at how the racial wealth divide has been supercharged by these inequalities, and I work with a group of kind of race and wealth scholars that sort of looks at this. But back to your point, part of probably the story of wealth is to understand the racial lens over that. We've lived through 40, 50 years of kind of the economy's been rewired to funnel wealth to the very top, but for 400 years we've lived in an economy that funnels wealth away from communities of color to white communities. So we have to look at both dynamics, including the reparation and repair of those historic inequalities. And that goes globally too, so in terms of, we another day we'll talk about sort of the immigration overlay on this, but I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I actually think there's a couple of the local proposals are around taxing wealth and investing in reparations funds or community reparations accounts, like that. My dad grew up in Evanston, Illinois. That's one of the towns that's experimenting. So I see a lot of local and experiments on that could be brought to scale. And then taxing wealth at a very high level and funding, baby bond accounts, so that within a generation you basically rebalance wealth and power. So you tax wealth, tax high incomes, tax inheritances, and dynastic wealth. Those are the sort of three missing pieces, really, and direct that wealth towards narrowing the gap. And, one thing that happened in the years after World War II was the 60s and 70s, you saw a narrowing of the racial income gap, the racial wealth gap, the gender gap. We were starting to move toward the Nordic model. And then the sort of extreme neoliberal intervention happened and we pulled apart. But, a lot of the pieces of the puzzle we know, and actually some of us have lived in those years, so.
Thanks for your talk. I wanted to ask, I kind of subscribe to the rotating villains description of Manchin and Sinema and the Democratic Party, so I've kind of given up on electoral politics. And in looking at your bio before coming to the talk, I saw that you wrote a novel that some may have interpreted as having given up on electoral politics as well and seeking a different path. And I just wanted to hear you comment on your motivation for writing that, and also whether or not it's impacted your ability to do your work. So I kind of wondered if you'd become a pariah with people after having written a novel like that. Thanks.
Yeah, I actually talked about this novel I wrote 2 years ago. A couple of you were here, I remember. How do I say it? It's sort of one person's response to the moment we're in terms of the climate crisis, and feeling like her entire lifetime of nonviolent action had not worked, and so she's dying of cancer, and she engages in an act of eco-terrorism. And very similar to what played out a year later with Luigi in United Healthcare. But it was a kind of a work of fiction in that I got to explore what would happen. The novel starts with that incident, and then it looks at the blowback, but it also goes back in history and looks at what formed her. and she believed that we were in a Dietrich Bonhoeffer moment in the fight to save the earth. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pacifist who then participated in an attempt on the life of Hitler and was executed for that. So she believed it was a Dietrich Bonhoeffer moment in the fight to save the earth. I don't think we're quite there, but I have days like that. And I'm happy to be, I'm a pariah in certain circles, and I forgot to mention this, and Helen said you should tell, so one piece of the work that I do is around engaging with people with wealth. So I'm the great-grandson of the meatpacker Oscar Mayer. Some of you may have heard of that. You may know the jingle. We can all sing together, right? So, but unfortunately, I could not bring the Wienermobile across the border. It's sort of probably would have not. I would have had to. Anyway, so, but when I was 26, I inherited what to me was a very substantial fortune, and that based on sort of my understanding of the world at the time, I gave that away. And so here I am, 40 years later, having to answer to my adult children, why, Dad, did you do this? But what it did, what it means is that I sort of grew up with this kind of intimate front row seat to that wealth defense industry. Those were the people that the family hired and told me, don't do what you're thinking of doing, that's reckless, So and there's a network called the Patriotic Millionaires that's formed. That's about 300 millionaires, a couple billionaires, who are very outspoken about the need to tax the wealthy, limit money in politics, and raise wages and support the living wage at the local and federal and state level. So check it out. Check out the Patriotic Millionaires, because it's a little bit of the good news. You think that the wealthy are kind of a monolithic block, but in fact, there are some cracks opening up in that monolithic block. And there's a whole generation of younger people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who won the lottery at birth, born on third base, and basically believe the future is redistributing wealth and power and land and privilege and trying to build equitable society. And you may not always agree with everything they say, but you can't deny that they're inspiring, in their trying to figure it out. So that's, I offer that up as another piece of the puzzle that I don't see this as a monolithic billionaire class. Even in California, as I said, 200 billionaires, some of them actually support this ballot initiative, and it's really cool to hear their reasons why, because it's essentially a solidarity expression of solidarity. And it's also a humble expression that, I didn't do it alone. And that's what Bill Gates' dad was always interesting about him. He'd say, nobody does it alone. That's a if you think you did it alone, let me take you to an island, and we'll let you live there for 10 years and see how damn rich you're going to be. It's a society, it's nature, it's other workers that create wealth, and you just landed at the right moment. And you need to own up to that and pay back. Society, pay back workers. Ideally, make your company worker-owned or completely community or stakeholder-owned. So, that's another piece of the fix, if you will. How are we doing there, Helen?
Okay, yeah. So, of course, thank you so much. As always, you enlighten us all. But I just want to speak to the question of the defeat of the progressive movement, the left movement, the labor movement, certainly the labor movement, the civil rights, feminist movements, all of those movements in the late 60s, early 70s. And we were defeated by the banks, we were defeated by the corporations, and then Reagan, who has become somehow an American hero, really put the fix on it, saying that government is the problem, right? And when we know that government needs to be part of the solution. So the solidarity that was built in the 60s and in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s of some kind of sense of community and how we all moved together was destroyed. And then we couldn't rely on government because it was defunded. We ended up relying on our own families, our own selves, and really suffering emotionally, socially, psychologically from that. And I think that the pandemic really showed that in great relief. So I think we're going through another period, as Chuck suggested, where people are saying, I don't want to live like that anymore.
Yeah.
I do want to rely on my neighbors. I do know that my neighbors are good people. And I think what's going on in Minneapolis now is so brilliant and inspiring. People are defending each other. They're forming organizations. They're really fighting back against a system that is wrong. And I think when we do that, and it will look at many different ways in many different places, we can begin to feel that we can rely on each other, we can form organizations, we can have governments that actually can serve the people rather than fleecing the people. And that's our hope.
There's a preview of your talk Monday.
I just heard that. Just to echo, I heard a statistic today, which is in 1964, like 68% of the population trusted government to do the right thing, and now it's like whatever 15% or something like that. And that and there's obviously a organized attack on the ability of government to solve big problems and to mess with our imagination, that to make us feel like, well, we can't come together and solve some of these problems. So I think that's part of the work, and part of it is if we can connect, like in Massachusetts, tax wealth and fund things that make a difference in people's lives and continue to tell that story. So again, I hope you'll come. Maybe we could continue this conversation on Monday night with Nancy, talking about the work in New York City, which had a lot of what Larry was just talking about, this self-organized, really amazing kind of community-based organizing stuff. A lot of what Nancy's going to tell us about is sort of the unique, some of the, not all unique, but kind of cool ways in which people organized to build this movement. So I hope we can be together again in a couple of days. Yeah.
Very inspirational talk. Thank you so much. But my question is really directed to corporations. You haven't really mentioned corporations in your talk. And I see billionaires, well, that's kind of individuals. But corporations, their legal mandate is one of greed. It's totally to make money for their shareholders. Now, is there anything, like, what are your views on what can be done to change that? I mean, I don't know if it's possible, but how do we change that sort of legal structure that is the corporation? What are points where we can kind of address that?
In a way, I purposely didn't address that because I was trying to work out a kind of rhetorical narrative frame, because corporations are so, for some people, they're abstract, or they're abstract in the sense that, well, they deliver services to me and they're depersonalized. But I think you're exactly right, and there's a whole kind of body around how do you rewire the corporation, and actually I do talk about this in the book. How do you rewire corporations so that they're broader stakeholder? In Europe, there's a whole kind of model of co-management. The governance bodies of corporations include workers, community representation, rights of nature, so the outcomes are different. So rewiring, having a federal corporate charter where if you're above a certain scale and you operate across certain states, you're subject to a very different set of charter and standards and sort of rights and responsibilities. And this whole idea that you can be incorporated in Delaware and do whatever the hell you want, is part of the problem. So, and they essentially become capital aggregators for the wealthy. So yeah, I think there's a whole larger discussion about sort of where are the intervention points around corporate power, which is a really important topic, and I didn't address it. So yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for
Thank you,
a
Helen.
very important and interesting presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. And there's a website, burnedbybillionaires.com, so check that out. Or also inequality.org is the website I co-edit. So
now we need to ask everybody to make their way downstairs, and so that the people can reset up the chairs and tables. And Chuck is graciously, I know you probably want to keep talking to him. He'll be He'll be making his way downstairs and will be willing to talk to people after this event. Thank you.